Donald J. Trump is in your shower. And this time he's right. He's not there to do any of the things that he was accused of back in the day. Not talking about that. But I'm Lauren Moss. This is E Pluribus Unum. And here on my show, we're not loyal to individuals. We think that in the public square and the public sphere, that's not the ideal way to think about things. We believe in following our concepts and ideas. So when the current president or any public figure gets something wrong, we'll call it out. But when they get something right, we'll call it out as well. Recently, Trump ordered the energy secretary to rescind a rule enacted by the Obama administration that made it illegal for you to buy a shower head that discharges over 2.5 gallons of water per minute. I mean, really, there are people sitting around in government thinking up things like, what if we make everybody do this? Control freaks that want to control how you wash your ass. If you want to have low-flow shower heads, great. I am all for that being an option in the marketplace. Just like you have a valve in your shower and you can turn up or down your water flow. That's where the control should be, in your hands. The American bather. And this isn't partisan because George H.W. Bush signed the Energy Policy Act of 1992 that required toilets to use no more than 1.6 gallons per flush. If you're old enough, I am. I remember, there was a big debate and a lot of noise in the media about this when it happened. And it's true that toilets have gotten better, but at the beginning, you had all these toilets and you'd flush it and your turds would just sit there doing the backstroke, you know, and Trump made this silly comment last year, and he said something like, people are flushing 10, sometimes 15 times, which, I mean, if that's the case, the problem isn't with the toilet. They might want to look at their diet. But for you communists, that translates to 6 liters per flush. I'm just joking. I'm fully fluent in the metric system, and I'm not against the metric system. It makes sense for science and technology. I do oppose the government ordering us to use it. However, so for the record, no, the metric system is not communist. Everyone should learn it in grade school just like I did. I was just joking, okay? But seriously, if you invent a high-efficiency toilet that works, people will use it. If you invent a high-efficiency shower head that works, people will use it. But maybe if you like bean and chile burritos and you need a high-powered toilet, or maybe you have a greasy, grimy job and you just want a high-powered water jet shower, these things should not be illegal contraband. In fact, if you get a little trickle out of your shower, what's to say you don't stay in there even longer to get clean and end up using even more water after all? I remember, I guess they're not for sale anymore, but there used to be these shower heads, and was Waterpik one of the companies that made them? I know Waterpik is famous for their like super jet toothbrushes, but I think they made these shower heads, and there are other companies, and you could turn the shower and get this super jet, like it was like these water hose nozzles, and some people like that high strength jet of water on them, like it was a massaging kind of thing or something like that. But even if some nerd can demonstrate that theoretically you don't need a certain volumetric flow to reach an optimal level of cleanliness, who the hell is some dork in Washington to order us to obey this silliness? You cannot have freedom if you do not have choice. You cannot have freedom if you do not have choice. It's asinine that we have some government ninnies or somewhere deciding how much water we're allowed to use to flush a turd or to lather our butts up with soap. I'm all for fuel efficiency, energy efficiency, conservation, and economizing. However, our government is here to serve us, not to parent us. When they take away your choice, you're less free. And that may sound corny, or you might say, Lauren, come on, it's just a shower. You're missing the point. You're losing your freedom, government mandate by government mandate. Let's look at your light bulbs. Now, overall, I like LED light bulbs, especially compared to the dangerous compact fluorescent bulbs that were a toxic hazard that were in vogue for a few years. However, have you noticed that they lie to you? Why is it not false advertising, and why is it not a scam that they tell you these things last a million years and then they blow out faster than even the old normal light bulbs? I have here a box, and I'm going to It says on this box it's a 6-pack of light bulbs they use 12 watts, but they're supposed to be 100-watt efficiency. And on this box it says 15-year lifespan, duration 15 year. Bullshit. No, they don't. I've in this box it was a 6-pack, and if I look in here, I've got 3 left. But I go through these things so quickly, and I don't know how they get away with this false advertising by saying these things last 15 years. I remember when they first came out, I believed it, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great because they cost more, but they're going to save money because they last for 15 years. I bet none of you have an original LED light bulb that's still working that you got, that you use normally or regularly. So these things, again, if they did not have any kind of mandate or anything like that, I would still buy them. There's a lot of good things about them, but you don't need a law. I'm opposed to making people do something. There's a psychological term. My wife's a psychologist, and there's a psychological term called reactance. I have a reactive personality, and what that means is not like being a reactionary or anything like that, but it's sort of a measure of stubbornness. And it's the people who don't like being told what to do. It's one of the reasons why I decided against going into the military, because I know I have this trait. I don't like taking orders. And it's like the idea of, even if you were going to do something, when somebody tells you that you have to do it, now you don't want to do it. So is that part of it? Maybe so. It could be, but that doesn't take away the point of, if you make something that people want, you don't need to make a law to make people buy them. The good old days, here we are producing audio and video here for you. And I have a long history in that field. My dad was a broadcaster. I literally grew up in radio stations along with him, but then I had internships working in TV stations. I ended up working in television production, and then working in broadcast engineering for a time back in the 90s. But back in the good old days, we had hot lights, and that's what we would call them, hot lights. So I've got a couple of, these are LED lights that I have in here lining us right now. They're 2 overhead LED lights. And but back then we had hot lights, and they were incandescent, and we called them hot lights because they really were hot. And you can ask anybody who worked in theater or in television, or who was in front of the camera, like news people and things like that. And these things would get so hot, and you had to have makeup people, because you would be there sweating, because these things would just cook you. It was like those infrared lights that you see in the buffet that keep the food warm. You would just bake under these things. And so now the lights are so much more comfortable because of the LED technology. I've got right here an example of a LED modern video light. And, they've got all the high tech and controls and things like that. And this thing will still get a little bit warm because it's a 350 watt light. I've got 500 watt lights, but these things aren't nearly as, first of all, they use much less electricity, and you could plug this into a regular outlet. But back in the day, you had to have like a TV studio, and they had to put in beefed up electricity because these lights would use up so much electricity. Then they'd have to beef up the air conditioning because it would, become unbearable in there. And so there are a lot of advantages to LED lights. But what I am against is the idea of making a law, and if these things are good, let them be sold on their advantages. You don't need to make a law about these things. So I mean, these light bulbs that I have overhead, I'm on my 3rd set of them that I used to light this set. And so far, I've had to replace them about once a year, and they burn out faster than the old incandescents. I still would use them because they use much less energy. They use much less electricity, but they're not a panacea. They're not perfect. And so here's a case of where these know-it-all nannies are going to make a law and tell you what you have to do, and then even worse, lie to you about it. These are going to last 15 years. No, they don't. They don't last 15 years. They don't last 5 years. They burn out as fast or faster than regular light bulbs. Or when I say regular, I mean the old incandescent bulbs, or even the compact fluorescents. That those things really, I mean, they were okay, I suppose, as a technology for a stopgap measure, but they had mercury in them and they were toxic and they were super fragile and they'd bust and then they'd get these little glass shards all over the place and things like that. But I don't need a law to make me buy these things, and I resent that such legislation exists. That's government nannyism. The other George Bush president, George W. Bush, signed the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 that set in motion this outlawing of incandescent bulbs. And so, again, this is not a partisan thing. I'm not here to defend or excoriate the Democrat Party, the Republican Party. I think that they're both complicit in this. But and this shows you because on one hand you had George Herbert Walker Bush, who started some of this nonsense, and then George W. Bush, and then some of this stuff was in the Obama administration, the Biden administration. We can go back into the 1970s with CAFE standards and things like that. But even appliances, let's look at appliances. Have you noticed that they don't last the way that they used to? People think, oh, this stuff doesn't work like in the good old days. Like somebody said this to me about cars, and actually I pointed out, actually cars do last longer than they used to. That's just not even disputable. If you go look at, my first car was a 1973 Pontiac Catalina. Now I bought it in 1984 or 1985, and by then it was about 10 or 11 years old, and it was coming apart. I paid $175 for it. It did not run when I bought it, so I had to fix it before I could even drive it. But anyway, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but you can just look. I mean, somebody can go post statistics, but the old cars were made out of inferior metal and they would rust apart in just a few years. The maintenance that you had to do on the engines would have to be rebuilt around 100,000 miles. The cars had distributors with breaker points in there, and these breakers would have a gap that would spark, and that would distribute electricity to the spark plugs, and those things would wear out, and you'd have to replace the breaker points and things like that. But anyway, growing up, we had two washing machines and one dryer, and this is in the 70s and 80s, and they lasted my entire youth. One washing machine was so old, actually, it was older than me and was there before I was born. I think it's from the 1950s, and it had this tub. It wasn't like an automated machine that went through different cycles. It just had this big tub and this rotor. And our neighbor, Brian, we were kids. Brian's about my age. He's out in California now. And I used to have this racing car, and it was a pedal racing car, and it was in the basement somewhere. And Brian had come into our house. He's probably about 5 years old, maybe 6. And he tried to find my racing car, and we were neighbors, and so there was no trouble with him coming into my house because we were just little kids like that, and we were, little, not toddlers anymore, but kind of best friends and neighbors. And so, but he just went in the house on his own. Nobody knew where he was, and he climbs up on this washing machine, and it was just this tub, and it would have this plunger that started it, and then you come and turn it off and take your clothes out, and it had these roller things. It had this big contraption. And they were two rollers looking like something out of like if you've seen a printing press, and they have the rollers that the paper goes through, and you would take your clothes and feed them into these rollers. And if you messed up or if you were stupid, you could get your fingers caught in there, and this thing would mash up your hands and probably crush your bones. They didn't have all these safety features on stuff back in the day. But this thing never broke. It's probably, as far as I know, it's probably still at my mom's house now, and it probably still works, but these things never broke. The dryer, which was more of a modern style dryer, never broke. The washing machine we had, we had the modern washing machine and then this old washing machine. So anyway, Brian comes in, he's looking for my racing car, my little toy racing car. And he climbs up, and it was one of these little pedal jobs that you pedal around. And he climbs up on this washing machine that was running, and it was full of soapy suds and clothes and things like that. And the reason he climbed up on it was because the light switch was up on the ceiling, and you had to, one of these pull chain light switches, and he was trying to reach it. And so he climbed up on this washing machine to turn on the lights, and the lid slips off the washing machine, and he falls in the washing machine, and he's getting washed around, swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. And so I guess my grandmother heard him, because he's in there crying and he's terrified. I suppose he could have drowned, but he's probably too big. But he's getting swished around and washing in this washing machine. It's not like now where they have these interlocking things, and you can't open my washing machine right now. If I want to add more clothes, and it's got this computerized panel, you've got to touch the button, you've got to pause the wash, you've got to wait for the cycle to stop, then the sensor activates, and then the lock unlocks, and then you can lift up the lid to put a little piece of clothes in. I think this is to keep stupid people alive. I don't know, but back then they didn't have these things, and so poor Brian was getting swished around in his washing machine till my grandmother came down there and fished him out. But these things didn't break. And I know something about this because back in the 1990s when I was in college, I worked as an appliance repair tech at Sears. And you old timers might remember the Sears department store chain at its heyday with the Sears catalog. It was kind of like Amazon now. You could buy everything out of a Sears catalog. You could buy houses. You could buy guns back in the early 20th century. Like you could buy a gun mail order or whatever. But at that time, you started to see the transition with a lot of appliances and things like that getting pressure to go to less durable parts. I remember fixing garage door openers and there was a gear and it was made out of nylon and this gear would always strip out. I mean, my last Whirlpool washing machine, here in the modern days, it lasted 8 years. And in our household, it's just my wife and me. So it's not like we've got a family or 8 kids or something like that we're washing clothes for. It's just two people in this household. But that washing machine only lasted 8 years, again with light use, with proper maintenance. I bought my Samsung high-end refrigerator in 2017, and the ice maker's already busted. And I call this Samsung authorized techs, and they don't know how to fix it. We have a second fridge, a KitchenAid, for when we have a guest over. It's out on the veranda with the barbecue smoker, and it already has problems. So my point is that, I used to fix this stuff with my own hands. And so you can build these things to last forever like they used to do. But there are organizations out there like the Appliance Standards Awareness Project, for example, and legislators and policymakers who are aligned with them, who are making up all kinds of laws that say how much electricity your appliance can use. Your washer, your dryer, your refrigerator, whatever. Now, when you engineer something, you have competing priorities for what you want to optimize for. You can optimize for durability and reliability and build it with heavy-duty parts. You can optimize for energy efficiency and make it out of the lightest possible parts, minimizing frictions, for example, by using plastic gears, like I mentioned, that used to strip out those nylon gears in the garage door openers instead of metal, or by using smaller motors, for example, but making those smaller motors work harder. I'm told that there are still Speed Queen washing machines out there, and I think, this is just something that I know secondhand, that the laundromats use. And these things, and you could buy one for your house, but I think they're, and I'm kind of speculating here, so, if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But these things are qualified or rated as commercial, so they're not restricted by these kind of, restricted laws to tell consumers what's best for them. And you can buy one of these machines and these things are still built like tanks and they'll run forever because you can get one for your house, but they're built with the durability that you would need if you were operating like a coin operated laundromat or something like that. So, and this is one of the things that people do is they buy a commercial product to get around, the quality limitations that a lot of consumer products now are mandated to have. So they're making appliances with sealed plastic drums and transmission units that have to be replaced as whole units, and you can't get repair parts for them. That's what happened to my last washing machine. The internal parts of the transmission are so delicate that when it goes bad, it's just disposable. So this thing with two people in the household, and actually when I bought it, I was single, so it had even lighter use. But and I specifically got a Whirlpool because they have all these little, where I live, these little cheapo brands. They look like little R2D2 units or something like that. And they're made to be very inexpensive and very accessible. But I said, no, I want a heavy duty American style washing machine that is, built to the standards that I'm used to and things like that. Not saying that all those other machines are not. I'm sure that some of them have, are high quality and things like that, but I wanted what I was familiar with. So the problem was after, we had a couple of maintenance calls on it here and there, but eventually the transmission unit, and that's what takes, you have an electric motor in there, and then you have your drum, where you put all your clothes in, and then you have your agitator. Now, a lot of the new machines, that's another thing too, now that I remember, a lot of these new machines don't have agitators. And then now they've gone to these horizontal loading machines that have gaskets and things like that. And they're supposed to be super energy efficient and don't use any water and stuff like that. I wanted a machine with an agitator. That's the big thing in the middle of the drum that goes back and forth when it washes your clothes. Okay. I don't want one of these super energy efficient machines that, oh yeah, you saved on your electric bill and, a bunny out there, but your clothes are dirty. So, but anyway, the transmission is the way that you get the energy from the motor to that agitator or to the drum to spin the drum. And when you go through your different cycles, that same motor, in one cycle it has to power spinning the drum. In another cycle it has to power the agitator or make it go back and forth, wish, 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 or make it, spin around at a high speed to take all the water out. Or something like that. So that's the transmission, and that transmission, before you could get parts for it, or they were made out of metal. And I literally remember this because I worked as an appliance repairman back in the 80s when I was in college, and they were made out of metal, and they were durable, and they rarely ever went bad. But now they're made out of plastic. They're sealed. You can't even if you could get parts, they're like ultrasonically welded together, and you can't even get in them. So when they go bad, your unit, you just got to throw it away. It's disposable. You couldn't fix it if you wanted to. That's what happened to us. And so we had to get a new unit. And now it's even worse because this thing has Wi-Fi. What the hell does a washing machine have Wi-Fi for? You still have to go to the machine and take out your clothes. I don't know, to spy on you, or so that they can, the Russians can hack it and use it as a botnet or something like that, part of a botnet. So I think that these things are just dumb. Now they got TVs or they've got refrigerators with screens on them. And Samsung is in hot water. I wouldn't buy one of those goofy things. I have a Samsung, but and at the time when I bought mine, it did have a Wi-Fi option. Again, that's stupid. I think maybe if I'm wrong, why is that so great? Let me know. But so Samsung has a refrigerator with a screen, and guess what they started doing? Even when you bought it, they weren't doing this, and you have no say in the matter. They started pushing ads into your house on the LED screen or LCD screen or whatever that they put into these refrigerators. So you pay a few $1,000s for this refrigerator, and now you've got to sit here and watch these ads from that Samsung is out there selling to somebody. It's asinine. I think that is at best tacky, probably unethical, but anyway. There is a qualitative difference that we can see here with these machines, and these machines have become disposable because they become so delicate. And there are lots of different reasons for that, but one of the key reasons is that they are mandated to be so energy efficient. The different ways that you could do this are by using lighter and lighter parts, more and more delicate mechanisms and things like that, and you're going to give up the durability that you get from something that's more solid, maybe less energy efficient. It's like, take for example, if you have like a Ford F-250 commercial pickup truck, it's going to be, they call it Super Duty, right? Why is it called that? Because it's made for, like, if you're a farmer on a construction site or something like that, and it's going to be made to be a lot more durable than, say, a Ford Explorer, which used to be built on a truck body, but now is really just a car, okay? And we'll get to that in a second. But these same people that want to control your life by making up all these rules and are contributing to the waste problem, because all these major appliances become disposable and unrepairable, filling up the landfills with junk. You can't even give this stuff to the junk man like you used to back in the day. Remember Fred Sanford, he was a junk man, right? Because there are fewer salvageable, reusable parts you can take off of old units. When I was in high school, there used to be these electronic surplus stores, and I had amateur radio license, and so I had these transmitters and receivers, and I was always into like electronics and stuff like that. And I would go to these stores and just rummage through all the electronic, you could say junk, but the stuff that they had, it was so cool because you, like, maybe you needed a vacuum tube. I used to have it was actually a CD player, but the output stage used 6 DJ8 vacuum tubes, used 2 of them because it was stereo. And these tubes are hard to find, and you could go into one of these salvage shops and find the old part that you needed or something like that, because these things that they would make would last for forever. I had a Hallicrafters transmitter, and this thing was probably older than my mom. You know, back in the day when I had this thing, it was probably already 50 years old, but the thing still worked. And if you make quality, efficient items, people will want them. People want to spend less money. You don't need to make a law for me to use LED lights. You don't need to disrespect me by lying about their durability. 15 years, my ass. Look, I have a friend who's a big boss in the airline industry. And a few years ago, I wrote an article about this at the time. I used to cover his company. That's kind of how I got to know him. But he told a CEO who reports to him to sign a $3.2 billion deal for 70 new jet turbofan engines. LEAP 1A turbofans. They're made in Cincinnati, and they're for big jet airliners. Why? Because they're extremely fuel efficient. He could have bought some other model or used older planes instead of buying new Airbus planes, which these LEAP engines were going to go into. When you buy like an airliner, like a Boeing or a Airbus or something like that, you actually buy the engines and the fuselage or the body or the airplane itself separately. So you buy, let's say in this case, I want these Airbus A320neo, and then they say, okay, well, what engine do you want it? You want this Pratt & Whitney engine? You want this Rolls-Royce engine? You want this GE engine? You know, LEAP, which is these are, CFM was like a joint venture between General Electric and this French company. But anyway, he bought these turbofan jets because they're fuel efficient. And that saves the company millions of dollars in jet fuel. And you don't need some government ninny telling them to do this. They do it because it just makes economic sense. So they're going to take into account the efficiency of the the engines, the fuel efficiency, and then also there are other factors such as the engine manufacturer came and said, we're going to provide you with this maintenance package and all of these other different factors. And so they made an educated decision, and fuel efficiency was driving that, but it wasn't because some bureaucrat somewhere is thinking up rules to tell them what they have to do. When people are left to exercise their free choice, they'll do the right thing. They'll balance all their competing priorities. But there are ninnies and nannies who are convinced that they know what's best for everybody, and they're here to dictate to you. You will use the shower I choose for you. You will use the washing machine that doesn't wash because I know what's best for you. Get out of my house with that. I'll give you one more example. Have you noticed that in the U.S., coupes and sedans have become an endangered species? So Ford still makes the Mustang. General Motors still makes the Corvette. But these are kind of niche vehicles or high-performance vehicles, and they do a lot for the marketing of the brand, because the Corvette, it's like probably like the only non-piece of crap that Chevrolet or that General Motors makes. Mustang is such a revered nameplate, and Ford, no matter how profitable it is I would imagine it's still profitable to make these cars, but it does a lot for the company's brand to have that car. But if you've noticed, the automakers have pushed everyone into a minivan, what they call crossovers now. But they're these big, bulbous, ugly monstrosities, these soulless creatures. Have you ever stopped to think what's happening? You know, why is that? Where are the coupes gone? You know, I like the Mustang. And the Mazda Miata, I think, is still out there. There's a couple of niche cars. I have a Subaru WRX, which is a great car. Not a lot of torque, but other than that, I love it. Reliable. There's things out there like, I think Toyota has a couple of coupes out there. But once again, here's what happened. The nattering ninnies in Washington came up with the CAFE standards. You may have heard of these. Corporate average fuel economy back in the 1970s. Well, Lauren, you're a troglodyte. You're against fuel efficiency and you don't want to save the planet. Well, hold on a minute. Okay. So these rules begin to mandate fuel economy standards, even though by then, I'm talking about the 1970s, and I'm old enough to, I was back in my day, I remember all this stuff. The Japanese were showing that if you just make quality economical cars, people will buy them. You don't need a law to force them to. Honda, Toyota, Datsun, which was Nissan, but at the time it was called Datsun in the U.S., had these cars that were, relatively speaking, reliable, trouble-free, built to higher quality standards, and very economical on fuel consumption. And people bought them because they were just a better economic choice. Now, back then, it's interesting because you still had a lot of World War II veterans alive, and you still had a lot of people that were very resentful about, that who were still around who had fought the Japanese. And so there was kind of a sense that buying a Japanese car was not patriotic. That's gone away completely by now. But there were still a lot of people who would call them rice burners and all this stuff like that. And really, you could get, depending upon where you lived, you could face a lot of crap, either if you were in a real nativist part of the country, or like if you were in Detroit or somewhere where the economy depended upon the U.S. auto industry, right? But so what was happening back then is that the Japanese, though, were making cars that were just better quality cars, and people were buying them without any kind of law mandating them or saying that you have to buy them. But what happened is, so the government later on started to put a squeeze to cars, and they came up with these rulings, and they said that you had to have whatever standards, and the standards would apply across your entire vehicle line. So let's say if you're Chevrolet, then you could still make some Camaros as long as you sold so many more, let's say something like a Chevy Celebrity or an Oldsmobile Omega or something like that, which is, both of those are just pieces of crap, that would, so that you're, as a producer of vehicles, your average fuel economy standards across all of your lines met whatever certain standards. And then they had like a gas guzzler tax. So if you made an exotic car, like say if you only produced Ferraris or something like that, well, you could sell them, but you would just have this big tax on the car that was for it being, it's called a gas guzzler tax. So more recently under former President Joe Biden, the cars, they just made up this rule, and they said that the cars had to become 2% more efficient every year. Now, if you think about this, if you know how math works, you can't just keep doing this forever or you'll just have no car. I think they know that. I think that's what they wanted. But what happens when you get to the point to where you're at 100 miles per gallon? And now you're going to come up against physics, okay? And it takes a certain amount of energy to move a certain amount of, or to accelerate a certain amount of mass. And then when you take into account rolling friction, all these different things like that to keep that in motion. Okay, so what happens when you get to 100 miles per gallon or you get to 200 miles per gallon? Are we going to be driving in go-karts or those little scooters that they have in Walmart for people who can't walk? Well, okay, Lauren, so you should buy an electric car and pay $30,000 when the battery conks out. Wait a minute. The same crowd that's telling us to buy electric cars is also out there telling us that these data centers are so bad because they use a bunch of electricity. So if the data center is bad because it uses a bunch of electricity, but then you want everybody in an electric car that uses a bunch of electricity, I mean, now what the hell? That's not consistent. How does that work? Okay. These nanny mandates that apply to cars don't apply to trucks because a lot of trucks traditionally or in theory are used as a commercial vehicle, and it's not so simple to put a standard on a commercial vehicle that has to pull trailers or haul loads around. Now they've tried, And that's led to reliability issues as engines have gotten smaller that have had to work harder and wear out faster. So if you think about the Toyota Tundra, for example, if you're a car person or a truck, if you follow the auto industry, then you know that the Tundra, or maybe if you're a consumer who's been a victim of this, the Toyota Tundra has had quality issues as they've gone from a V6, from a V8 to a V6. And now they put in the smaller engine in the Tundra, and they'll do tricks like maybe put a turbocharger or something like that on it, which makes it work harder so that it can have a same or comparable level of output to the V8 engine. And when it has to work harder, guess what? It wears out faster. So anyway, back in 2008, these know-it-alls came up with a footprint rule to base these fuel efficiency targets on the wheelbase of the vehicle or the space between the wheels so that a larger vehicle has lower efficiency targets. Now, it goes into that seemed like a good idea at the time category. What could possibly go wrong? So guess what? When people decide they don't want these little rinky-dink meep cars that are, that's why I call them meeps. You see a lot of them down here in these little pollitos. The pollito is Spanish for like a little baby chicken. And like these little taxis, these little things, they look like you could lift them up and tip them over. And they're they're like these little Fiats, and and they're well suited for like a Paris or Rome alleyway. And you see these little cars that make sense in a place like urban Paris or urban Italy, where they have these 400-year-old streets or something like that. I've seen a term, I think in the industry, I'm not sure about this, but I think that in some places they call them city cars because they're designed for just going around the city. They're not designed for like in the U.S. where let's pack up the family and drive across the country or something like that with big trunks and things like that. They're more for running errands and stuff like that. But these things, like I said, they're designed more for like a urban setting, not even a U.S. urban setting, but like maybe a European urban setting. I don't know what East Asia is like. I've been to Central Asia before, but this Central Asia is like the U.S. is like wide open spaces and things like that. The great steppes over like in Mongolia and in Kazakhstan and stuff like that. Really, really beautiful places. But these vehicles that it seems that they want to mandate are more suited for like one of these urban constricted spaces, but not for like a Colorado interstate. And so what do people do? They go and buy one of these crossovers, which is basically a big ugly car that technically qualifies as a light truck. So if your wheelbase is beyond a certain limit, then that vehicle, I think there's some other things you have to include as well, is no longer a car under these fuel economy mandates, but now qualifies as a light truck. So what happens, but with these best intentions, now they burn even more gas than they would have if these people stopped trying to control every aspect of everyone's life. Decent, attractive cars that burn a reasonable amount of fuel are impractical to make and sell now. So instead of these ninnies accomplishing their dreams of everyone being in a tiny little Mr. Bean car, or more to their liking, not having a car at all and bowing to their collectivist utopian dream of no private transportation, instead, they've pushed everyone into these big, ugly monstrosities that they call crossovers. And they're soulless. None of these things are, I've never seen a crossover that's like, wow, I'd love to have that car. All the manufacturers are making them. They don't make cars anymore. Even BMW and Lexus and all those guys have gotten into the game. And so they're making these big butt ugly things. If you're behind them, it's this big bulbous butt. You can't see in front of you. I don't know if they're a safety hazard or not for the people in them. But, these nannies have brought this dystopia on themselves. But be vigilant, because I promise their solution is going to be even more regulation and even more restriction. They've got our washing machines. They've got our toilets. They've got our light bulbs, our dishwashers, our cars. What's next? I've showed you that both the Democrats and the Republicans are complicit in this. Only libertarians and those with libertarian viewpoints have consistently resisted these incursions. And sure, I'll give Trump credit for that he deserves for restricting these silly potty restrictions, but he's no libertarian. Hell, his tariffs have created a crisis for American soybean farmers and contributed to the affordability crisis of our consumer goods. But still, a deserved kudos for getting the shower Stasi out of our bathrooms. What do you think? Be sure to click on like and tell me in the comments if it is the job of government to act like our mommy and tell us what's good for us and how to wash our butt and take a dump. Or is the government better as a servant, respectful of our ability to make adult choices as free people? Do you broadly support government regulating minute details of private life, like how much water you can use to flush a turd? Or do you feel like our civil liberties are under threat? I'm Lauren Moss, and this is E Pluribus Unum. I really want to hear from you, and I'm looking forward to your comments. We're in kind of a golden period right now where we're not yet as big as I hope that we can be with your help, especially if you think that these are important issues that we are addressing, and a heterodox viewpoint that maybe more people need to hear. But my point is that because we are not yet where we want to get, we are still at the point to where there is time to interact with you. So I promise to read your comments, and I promise to, time permitting, interact with you. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if there are other things that you want us to cover, and look forward to you in the next one.
Pluribus unum, willow remorse unum, willow remorse unum, pluribus unum.